TE Talks with Guides is a weekly podcast for lovers of history, travel, and all things Italian. Welcome back, everybody, to TE Talks, sponsored by Through Eternity Tours. I'm your host, Rob Allen, and on TE Talks, we get to talk with some of the most fascinating people who make a living out of being wonderful storytellers. We get to delve into what is their passion, what drives them to make this choice in life, to share their fascination and love with history, architecture, art, history, and many more things, and spend their days imbibing people with their passion and making them fall in love with Italy and all of its many beautiful parts. So today we have Enrica joining us. Ciao, Enrica.
Ciao a tutti.
How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Now, before you and I start chatting, because, I may diverge off of different things, I've been known to do this. I did want to say what we will be discussing today to go along with our lovely YouTube video series of TE destinations, which will be Trastevere, one of the most famous neighborhoods of Rome. And for many of you US followers, it is not Trastevere, is what I used to say when I came here. It's Trastevere. But before that, let us get involved and talk to you, Enrica. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Why don't you tell the group how long you have been a guide with Through Eternity, how long you've been an official guide, a little bit about your life.
Okay, so how long for Through Eternity? I think it's now something like 5 to 6 years, considering the year of the lockdown, etc. But it's a wonderful company to work to work for. But I've been a guide since I was 26 years old. Now I'm 46, so about 20 years now. So it's been a long time, but I wanted to be a guide since I was a little kid. Mm-hmm. So I was 4 years old when my mom used to take me around the city of Rome, Trastevere, the Jewish ghetto areas that she loved. And we used to go around the city with this huge book. For me, it was a huge book. Mm-hmm. The book of the Touring Club of Rome. Probably you know what I'm talking about. Is a red book.
Red Bible.
The red Bible of the guides. I still remember I was so little and the book was so heavy in my hands. I couldn't hold it. And I still have that book. And for me now it's this tiny. So it's hilarious when I think about it, but yes.
So you were how old reading this book? Because that book is 4. My God, that book is.
I was watching the pictures of the churches, the maps.
I have to bring out, I actually went to one of the Mercatini because the Touring Guide Italy has a book for every territory of Italy. So I bought one for Sicily and Campania, and of course, just for Rome.
I have them all.
Of course you do. Of course you do. So you have the entire series, and you're reading these guidebooks. I mean, the Touring Italy guidebook, which is kind of what is a prerequisite to read, was really, really important for us when we were studying to become guides, and very intense. It kind of covers everything, every church, every chapel, all the pieces. And so this is what you were doing as you were reading for your own private pastime.
Well, let's say I don't read them every day, but I certainly use them when I travel. So, for example, I'm organizing a trip to Naples because there is an exhibition on the gladiators at the Archaeological Museum, the National Museum in Naples. So I'm preparing myself for a great visit. I'll be a guide for myself, basically. So I'm using those books to prepare and to enjoy a bit better what I'm going to see.
Of course. In fact, that reminds me of something. I mean, this is what people need to understand about when somebody chooses the career of a guide and how difficult it is, because it is very difficult to become a guide. And, it is physically challenging for people. I don't think people realize sometimes that, when they're on a vacation or they're touring, they push themselves very, very hard because they have to cover a lot of stuff. But that's what we have to do every day. We do it because we love it. We love it, and we love to learn more things or to see or hear different points of views. If I recall that you and, if I'm not mistaken, it was you and Guia and Eugenia took a vacation to see a specific exhibit in London, and I was in London living there at the time. So of course I met up with you, and we all went to see the exhibit together. That's what I mean by a passion. I'm sure that you read all you knew about the artist that we saw, and was ready to. I mean, we all discussed it. We all loved it. We all looked at the paintings and saw kind of points of view. It's funny because even today, one of our really top clients, her name is Lynn Galliano. She's American, but she does have an Italian name, and she's coming out here. Her trip was postponed. So Lynn is coming out with her husband. They're like, okay, we're coming out in June, so we're taking tours with her for next week. And I'm friends with her on Facebook, and I'm seeing something. I can't tell you. I was like, oh, che emozione, because she was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which for me was the first museum that I ever fell in love with. It's when I started to fall in love with museums, was the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And she was photographing on Facebook all of these paintings. And she shows us one from Duccio. It's a veiled Mary, with Christ on her lap, kind of pulling the veil from her face. And it's a tiny, tiny painting. But at the time, which she clarified for me, was 2004. So I've been talking about this since that time, because they spent more money on that painting than they had ever done before. And I always use it as a kind of context to talk about Giotto Stefaneschi triptych in the gallery, the Pinacoteca of the Vatican Museums. One thing like that size, $45 million in 2004. And imagine that I say to everybody, so how much would this cost for a Giotto Stefaneschi triptych? Anyway, so I was really so excited to see this that I kind of wrote her a message. But anyway, so to get back on track, I understand your passion. Now, I wanted to share with people that when, people who apply to work with my company, and this very, very well, that you are required to present to me pieces, and the pieces are always the same. The two pieces that I ask people are the Transfiguration by Raphael and the Laocoon, which is in the sculpture collection of the Vatican Museums. And I am very much remember how much I loved your presentation of Laocoon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, oh yeah, I do remember. I think I told you at the time too, I thought I was wholly, duly impressed by it. So, it was one of my favorite presentations throughout the years of the company, and I will never forget it. So anyway,
Thank you.
Not a problem, not a problem. Thank you, actually. Thank you very much. The question is Trastevere. Let's talk about Trastevere.
So it's funny that you asked me to have this chat on Trastevere, because I grew up very near Trastevere district. Trastevere is considered central, and it's expensive now to live there. I was living in the outskirts of Trastevere. I don't know whether you're familiar with Ponte Bianco, behind Stazione Trastevere, Piazzale Dunant, right at the end. And I grew up in Portuense district, so right next door. So Trastevere is the place where my high school was in Viale Trastevere, the Ursuline nuns, Ursuline nuns, and so Trastevere was for me the base for all my explorations of the city when I was much younger. Not necessarily studying, but just what you do with friends. So you go and have a walk. You go and take some photos with your friends, or whatever you do in the afternoon, in free afternoon. So that was my district where I sort of grew up in. So I was sort of surprised, because for me, it's like to have this connection again. I mean, we don't get to tour Trastevere very often, because it's one of those tours that is a bit off the beaten track. So you have to have an extra day to go there, because the main things you come to visit to Rome and you must see, those are the Colosseum if you're coming for the first time, the Forum, the Palatine Hill, the archaeological area, the Vatican, squares and piazzas. But Trastevere is one of those places that has so many treasures in it and so much history that has to be seen if you have some extra time. Also because it's a completely different experience from what you do in a museum. Yeah. In a museum, you are overwhelmed sometimes with history and art and guides and people. You go in Trastevere for a walk, you're surrounded by history and art, but at the same time, you go there and get a glass of wine. It may happen you sing a song with people singing, playing guitar in the street, like happened to me a few months ago. It was July last year after the lockdown. I went for a walk in Trastevere. There was a guy playing guitar. I just stopped for a moment listening, and he said, "Oh, come on and sing." So I started singing, and all of a sudden the windows open and people started singing from the windows. People came from their came in the street from their home houses right there. And after half an hour, we were 20 people just singing all together. So it's that kind of place. I mean, it's magical. Everything can happen. Although it's true that during the years, it's changed a lot. I mean, now you go to Trastevere, there are plenty of restaurants, bars, spa. The new thing is the district for the Movida. But for me, Trastevere has a different vocation. It has a vocation, first of all, if I could give a gender to this district, let's say that, I would say is a female. Because there are many females coming from that district that may had an input in the history of Italy, of Rome itself, of the district. And I can mention a few, like, let's say, even the Fornarina. That was the lover of Raphael. They used to live in Via di Santa Dorotea, so very near to Villa Farnesina, where Raphael was painting back in those days, in Trastevere district. And Raphael was so deeply in love with her. I mean, there are different opinions. We are not entirely sure who this Fornarina is, but I like the story. I like to imagine this. Let's say I am tempted to say that La Fornarina is the daughter of a baker. They used to live in Trastevere, and the name is Margherita Luti, and apparently they fell in love deeply, but Raphael couldn't marry her because of her origins. They were not noble origins. Very humble, yes. And so anyway, the story wants that Raphael loved her all his life. I mean, since he met her. And is a lady that has an impact even in art. I mean, not because she did something particular, but because we have paintings of her in the Barberini palace, painted by Raphael, with this bracelet around the arm saying, "You're mine." And it's so, it's such a beautiful love story.
That's true. They've discovered even maybe possibly a ring on her finger after a restoration that it may have been pointed over, saying maybe they.
We don't know, because
no, we don't know. But
to be honest with you, we're not even sure that the Fornarina is the daughter of a baker. There are many different interpretations. Some people also say that she may have been a prostitute, but I mean, I like the idea of the Fornarina living in Via di Santa Dorotea. So, and it was a honestly love story.
It is, and if I recall, when he was working, because we always called the Villa Farnesina, but in reality it was wanted, as the Italians say, voluto, wanted by Agostino Chigi, the famous wealthy banker from Siena, and that he was very stressed out because Raphael, whilst painting beautiful frescoes there in the Villa Farnesina, was stopping the painting because he was so lovesick about the Fornarina. These are these wonderful stories we like to talk about. How ironic then, I asked you, I did not know that you grew up in Trastevere. Maybe I have a sixth sense that you had your...
Oh, you do. You do.
yeah, sometimes I do. It's very interesting, and that's lovely to hear, because you are a true Roman. You have lived abroad. You did live in London for many years, and then you came back to Rome. And here I am, an expat, an American who has lived in Rome almost 24 years now. And this area is Trastevere. The neighborhood is intrinsically connected to very Roman people, very, very, and it's filled with contradictions. So it's filled with very Roman, true Roman people. In fact, the Trasteverini have a festival they call Noantri, which is their own kind of dialect, saying we ourselves. It's like we're celebrating we ourselves, and they do it in July.
Because we're different from you.
I'm sorry, what?
Because we are different from you.
Yeah, exactly.
And also we're better than you.
Not what they're better, but it's like we're celebrating ourselves. But because I've even heard that they consider our Trasteverini, people of Trastevere consider themselves to be the most authentic Romans, when in fact, in ancient Rome, because ancient Rome is everywhere Rome is today, that's where the foreigners lived. And even today, this Trastevere is like the ideal place for many expat, Anglo-Saxon expats, so many British and many Americans, Canadians, Australians, they all love to live in Trastevere. I do not. I made a specific choice because I felt like it would really make me live away from a lot of Italians, and I wanted to learn the language and be able to be more immersed with it. I was afraid of it. But a dear friend of mine who, was the one who donated the library that all the guides use from our office, who's no longer with us, but she was like La Marchesa. She was literally married a nobleman, like there are, and she was very much in Trastevere, and I went to visit her very often. So I know a lot about Trastevere and like the daily life. But, I'm sure it's interesting for us to kind of converse and look at this from different points of view. But let's talk about the ancient world, right? There are,
It's very important because it's completely opposite today. Today, if you want to say to someone, go and visit something really Roman, go and visit Trastevere, in ancient time it wasn't like that. First of all, Trastevere wasn't even part of the city until the first Roman Emperor Octavian Augustus, which included the district of Trastevere in the city. Although it was on the opposite side of the river, it became the 14th region of the city that before had only 13. So imagine that during the Republic, let's say if we think about the foundation of the city of Rome, so in the 8th century before Christ, in Trastevere area, you just greens, fields, and probably no one is really living there. During the Republican period, we have the city that is growing. We see the city growing, and on the opposite side of the river, Trastevere, respect to the city, the side of the river where the city is, well, there are people, merchants that live there, people that work along the river in the harbor, or the Jewish community, which I believe Katerina has been talking about the Jewish community earlier on this year. And she probably mentioned that they were living in Trastevere before being sort of moved on the opposite side of the river. The Syrians community, there was a sanctuary dedicated to these Oriental gods, basically. So, and this is also what I like about Trastevere, because this hasn't changed. A vocation for inclusions and diversity. It's always been like that. And even today, if you go, and it's true, Trastevere has changed, but if you talk to, there is a place, an Egyptian shop. I mean, a guy from Egypt runs this shop and sells liqueurs and wines. Well, he feels like, he talks himself like, I'm from Trastevere. This is my home. This is my house. And I'm happy here. And Trastevere is where I want to die. I mean, it's incredible because it reminds me of this whole community that used to, these communities used to live there even before being part of the city of Rome. And there are archaeological evidence everywhere, even in Trastevere. Beside the people living along the river Tiber, working in the harbors, the Jewish community, the Syrians, you name them, there was also at some point a huge area that was covered by what we call the Orti di Cesare. Julius Caesar had a huge area for agriculture, but also a villa for relaxation. And we don't forget that Cleopatra at some point had an affair with Julius Caesar, which was married with Calpurnia, by the way, the wife. But Cleopatra spent a couple of years here in Rome, and of course she couldn't live with Calpurnia, the wife of Julius Caesar, so she was moved in the villa in the Orti di Cesare, which probably today is we are not entirely sure the exact location, but we believe is very near to Trastevere train station in that area, close to the river. So
Know that.
archaeological evidence have been found there, but we found archaeological evidence of other villas, like the Villa of Claudia. Oh, this I love, because we mentioned earlier on Villa Farnesina, which is a villa of the Renaissance. Agostino Chigi, Raphael worked in Villa Farnesina, but underneath the excavations discovered another villa, another
Sure.
the ruins of the villa, which may be the villa of this Claudia. Who is Claudia? Well, Claudia is a person I know rather well because I studied Latin at school. And when we study Latin, we also study literature. So I was in love with this poet, a Latin poet that lived in the first century before Christ, called Catullo. And he wrote to this lady Claudia so many poems of love and also hatred. I mean, the relationship was really not an easy one because she was married, she was having many affairs, and he was terribly in love with her. So every now and then he used to get upset with her, and in the poems he writes, you can feel this. So let me show off my Latin for a second, because I read these poems that reads, it's very short, and says, Odietamo, quarid faciam fortasse requiris, nescio, sed fieri sensio et escrocior. And it means, literally, I love you and I hate you. Maybe you are going to ask me, how is this possible? I don't know, I just feel that this is what I have inside and I torment myself. And if you think that it was written 2000 years ago and could be, it's so modern, it's something that we could feel today about a boyfriend or an ex or whatever. So I was terribly in love with this artist Catullo, and we know that he dedicated these poems to Lesbia, which is the pseudonymous for this lady Claudia, which villa was the one probably underneath Villa Farnesina. So anyway,
I didn't realize that. And just to clarify a couple of things, because you've brought up some very, very interesting points, just to give a picture for people who don't know, that Trastevere is literally, Tiber River means Tevere in Italian. So tra means across. It is the area across the river. And to give an identification for people, because we have to let them realize that there was the island with the two ancient bridges. That was the way you crossed. And there were no other bridges until the 15th century with Sixtus the Fifth, Fourth, building his Ponte Sisto. And then a bunch of other bridges that kind of connected Trastevere in the 19th century, starting, and then the 20th century. So it was only connected in the last couple of 100 years. Before then, it was very isolated. You went
absolutely. To cross the river, you have to. I mean, there are these two bridges. Let's say the Ponte Cestio. They reach the Tiber Island. Then you have to take another bridge to reach the actual opposite side of the river. And then there was the bridge, the Elius, the one, the nearer bridge right above, where Castle St. Angelis, the mausoleum of Adrian. All the area in between wasn't covered by any bridge at all whatsoever. Yep. So there were these, each person in Trastevere, each family had their own boat because they had to cross the river every now and then. And this is also why Trastevere, Transtiberim, you're right, on the opposite side of the river, the region on the opposite side, is somehow formed its own identity. During the century. They were so isolated from the others. And I mean, even the rich families, beside on Via della Lungara, which we can talk about later on, where we have Villa Farnesina, Palazzo Cortisini, but if you reach the heart of Trastevere, you really don't find huge Renaissance building belonging to noble families, because it wasn't well connected to the rest of the city. So the Trasteverini used to have their boat to cross the river. At some point, there was also a system of ropes that was linking the different sides of the river. So a rope was fixed on the sides, and the boat would cross, just moving holding the ropes to avoid that the current of the river would take them where they didn't want to go. So they were very well organized. And now the river has buttresses that contain the river from the flooding. But you have to imagine back in those days, it wasn't like this. The river had also like beaches, not for suntan, but certainly a lot of sand and even the flooding was quite a big problem, especially in the Trastevere area. So this is also why, like in the rest of the city, but even the area of Trastevere was covered little by little with these rubbles and stuff that came from the river, and the level of the ground increased incredibly. And this is also why underneath we have a different city, the Roman city, to explore.
Sure, absolutely. In fact, you mentioned about the Villa Claudia underneath the Villa Farnesina. It's not like people just decide to do a dig. There are reasons why. And then, of course, they discover a whole open world because there was a flood in 1870. They said, okay, this has been happening too much now. Rome is the capital of a brand new kingdom of Italy, that we have to have this enormous project where they decided to build these huge tall buttresses to prevent the river from flooding. And that is when they discovered that villa. Those frescoes of that villa that you're mentioning are now in the Palazzo Massimo, if I'm not mistaken, that you can see part of the Villa Claudia. I always thought it was Villa Giulia, but I thought it was like that what they discovered underneath the Villa Farnesina is on display. I did want to say something about this though, aside from these are just all wonderful aspects that we are discussing, and one could have a whole episode talking about the river itself. We kind of often, because we don't have the evidence, we don't have the physical facts, the industry for many centuries during the Middle Ages up through the Renaissance was mills on the river. And that, and then the industrial age came on, which was also very important. A lot of that has all been removed. So the river seems kind of like this ancient ruin that's very sleepy, but it did very much affect how Trastevere was. But Trastevere itself is a place that does have very important artistic buildings, archaeological sites. But aside from those things, as we have already begun with, we talk about Palazzo Farnese or Campo dei Fiori or the, maybe the Aventine Hill or something else. But the place of Trastevere is intrinsically defined by the people. The people, as we have already described, they are the ones, the neighborhood, the sense, the identity of this place is brought up immediately by the people first. It is a place that has incredibly wealthy people today, but it also has an extremely poor level of people as well. There are many homeless that live there, and that has been that way for centuries. So that's why in Trastevere you find many areas that are places that are connected to the churches that are for charity, to help the poor. San Gallicano, many other different areas, to feed the poor, to help the poor, and they still have very much this presence today. So it's like you have the wealthy living in these beautiful terraces up on the top, a lot of them expats, and then you have a lot, of the homeless living on the streets of this place. So I just wanted to and you implied that also when we were talking. Wow. So we've talked about Cleopatra's house. We've talked about Villa Farnesina. This is the thing, I think you and I have even chatted a little bit before that Trastevere is not always the easiest place, and that has a whole world underneath. We go into the underground area underneath the beautiful Church of San Crisogono. Let's mention, let's talk about two churches that people could choose to visit if they want to go in. And I'm going to bring them out to you, and you tell me what you know about them, and I'll tell you what I know about them, and we'll just chat about them to just give people a hint. And so these two churches are Santa Cecilia and, of course, Santa Maria in Trastevere. So what do you think?
So if you go to Trastevere, you cannot miss these two churches for, the amount of art that you can find there, the quality and the history behind but let's say they're not the only ones. But of course, we understand that in Rome there are 1,200 churches, I believe, something like this.
Okay,
And
I never remember the exact number.
I mean,
A lot.
the more you have to make a selection. If you had the chance of choosing just two of them, I would say let's start with Santa Cecilia. And then even if Santa Maria in Trastevere is probably the most important one, Santa Maria in Trastevere is the first church dedicated to Mother Mary in history. And we're talking about the 3rd century after Christ, so one of the earliest churches. Yeah. But Santa Cecilia is very special because in Santa Cecilia, first of all, you can see these layers. So the layers that belongs to the ancient Roman period, so Republican houses underneath the church, and then you enter this church that is now changed a lot compared to how it was built originally, because in the 18th century the taste was different. Earthquakes happened. They had to restore many churches, including Santa Cecilia, and it has changed a little bit. So from the original aspects that the church had. But I would say if you go to this church, there are 4 reasons I will go to see this church. The first one is probably the frescoes by Cavallini. And I'm going to mention in a second who this guy is, because it's someone that I'm really, is an artist that I really love. The second would be the Ciborio above the altar, which is by Arnolfo di Cambio. And Arnolfo di Cambio is an artist that you probably are going to hear about when you go to the Vatican to visit St. Peter, because there is a very important statue in St. Peter that was made by Arnolfo di Cambio, and he's the statue of St. Peter. So he's a very important artist of the Middle Ages.
And he is a contemporary of Cavallini. I believe they're from the same time.
Absolutely. They worked together, I believe, in Assisi, in the church, in the Superior Church of St. Francis in Assisi, so they met somehow.
Probably like the 2 biggest superstars artists that came and worked in Rome.
Oh, yeah. But there was also Giotto working there. So, and this is where the things get complicated, but it's incredibly interesting. So the frescoes by Cavallini are my first one. The mosaic of the Alps. There are mosaics that were made when the church was rebuilt, the 9th century, by Pascal I, Pasquale I. And the frescoes are very important because Pasquale I is famous. Pascal I is first as a pope for having redecorated many churches, but it is in a sort of very different style from what the artists were doing until that moment. So you have to imagine the Roman Empire fell, but there is part of the empire that is still up and running in the east. Istanbul, Constantinople, Byzantium, the area, and we call it the Byzantine Empire, let's say at some point. The artists came from there. The taste was different. They had different ideas on how to decorate things, and you recognize a Byzantine mosaic because it's very simple. There is usually a golden background, the few people standing. It's a statical image. It doesn't tell a story. The important is the message. That's it. While with Pasquale I, we sort of go back to the origins when the figures start talking again, saying something again. The background is blue, like the sky. And there is an expression in their eyes. I mean, there is more naturalism than the Byzantine sort of style. I mean, we're still in the Middle Ages. We cannot pretend that everything's changed, but you can see there is an attempt to change the way in which we're doing things, to make them more local, more something that belong more to our tradition rather than the Byzantine one. So the Alps is something you must see. You must see the statue by Stefano Maderno of Santa Cecilia. That is an incredible piece. Stefano Maderno is not incredibly famous, by the way, and it's a shame because he should be. If you go to Santa Cecilia and look at the statue, you realize that sort of, it's very emotional. Now, Stefano Maderno is an artist considered one of the a mannerist artist, which
Mhm.
means it's the moment of the passage from Raphael, Michelangelo to the Baroque
Yeah.
period. It's
Mhm.
a period that many people consider a bit boring. You know, the artists don't know how to do better than Michelangelo and Raphael, so they try to do different things, but rarely they do better things, yeah, absolutely, than them. Stefano Maderno, I believe, with the statue of Santa Cecilia reaches um, almost the Baroque.
Mm-hmm.
Santa Cecilia talks to you. The
Yep.
Baroque art wants the spectator to get involved in even in the architecture. If you think at St. Peter's Basilica,
Mm-hmm.
the two big arms of the column that embrace the Christian community,
Mm-hmm.
that square has a meaning only if you see people walking in it.
Mm-hmm.
Is a theatrical scene.
Yep.
Is a way of saying it? Is a theater where everybody participates somehow.
Sure.
And the Baroque art is made to cause an emotion in you, to do something in you, to move you in a way or another, bad or good. But this is something that the Baroque art does. It wants you to feel something.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the statue of Santa Cecilia, we're not even in the Baroque period, but Santa Cecilia somehow you don't look at the statue and say how well it's done,
Mm-hmm.
but you see the struggle of this lady. You see
Yeah.
the fate. You see the message. Is an incredible piece that you must see.
Yeah, I would imagine also because there's such a dramatic story connected to it that many people don't realize is that they knew that Pascal had re-exhumed her remains and brought it to the church that we're talking about and buried her body. Right.
Basically, the story of Santa Cecilia is that she was, well, let's say the stories of many Christian martyrs, especially women, are very similar somehow, because at some point they had to really pass a message to the community. But Cecilia is this lady that she is a Christian, very young. She got married with a pagan guy, Valeriano. She managed to convert the husband, Valeriano, the first night of, after the wedding. She said, well, news, I'm going to stay virgin for the rest of my life. So you have to live with it. And Valeriano, he's quite sweet. I mean, Valeriano converted to Christianity as well, and they converted the rest of the family. But at some point during some persecutions, Santa Cecilia and the husband were condemned to death.
Yeah.
Now, Santa Cecilia, the story, she's considered a saint also because they tried to kill her in all possible ways and she couldn't die. So that they tried to strangle, I don't remember exactly the sequence because they're all different, but let's say to strangle her. They tried, at some point, they took her to the bath of her house, to the thermal bath of the house, because according to what we know, the Cecili was a family that could afford a thermal bath in the house. Well, it was pretty wealthy. And they left them there for 3 days, thinking that she would have died for the vapor, for the hair. But she didn't. At some point, the only thing that remained to do was to just, with a sword, cut her neck, having her decapitated. Yeah, but the head didn't fell from the body, stood attached. And she was basically buried that way. Now, we're talking about the death of Santa Cecilia in the third century.
Yes.
Pasquale I took the body from the place where she was actually buried. She was buried in the catacomb of San Callisto.
Yes.
Callisto, which is another pope of the early Christian community that we are going to mention later on when we're going to talk about Santa Maria in Trastevere. But Callisto
Mhm.
At some point was running the catacombs that now have his name, Catacombi of San Callisto. The
Mhm.
catacombs in the Middle Ages weren't protected by vandals, by barbarians, by predators, by people they try and enter to steal
Mhm.
things from there. So it became very unsafe to have the body of the martyrs
Mhm.
left in there in the catacombs. They weren't visited anymore. They were sort of abandoned. So if you Pope try to move the bodies, the relics of the saints inside the city, and this is what happened to Santa Cecilia, that is moved back in the church of Santa Cecilia that now has been built for her. But the story doesn't finish here because like something like 700 years later, 800 years later, in 1599, um, they're doing some restoration of the church. And they find the body, the tomb, the coffin of Santa Cecilia, and they decide to reopen to just check
Mhm.
how is she doing. But when they open the coffin, they realize that the the body is intact, has
Perfect.
been corrupted by that. And this is a miracle. Now imagine how important it was back in those days
Mhm.
for the church to find a body of a saint which was intact, because they had the proof that they could show to everybody. So the body of Santa Cecilia was exposed for a few days so everybody could see what miracle it was. But also it was, everybody was so moved there. Stefano Moderno was asked to represent her, to make a statue of the saint. And Stefano Moderno represented Santa Cecilia the way in which she was discovered. So laying down, and you can see the cut on the neck, you can see the drop of blood in the neck, but and you can also see the tiny, lovely ends that are indicating the Trinity,
Yeah.
and then it's so moving.
Mhm.
You have to see it to really understand. I'm sure we're going to.
Yeah, yeah. But they also said, from what I've heard from my story that I choose to recount to people, is that he was there as an eyewitness to see the body, like many others, as you said. But there was
Absolutely.
a point after her body was exposed to air that it disintegrated. So he had done sketches of her. So they have this like permanent memory because of Stefano Maderno's sculpture. But as you point out, and theatricality, yes, it's so theatrical. And the whole idea, and when people saw this, because they knew the story, we tell people the story today, but in the context of that time, everyone knew the story. And so they have this like immortal statue to recall a thing that was done during the Counter Reformation, right? This was what Baroque is about. And that's a very valid point that you bring up, that it is the beginning of it. To go on to this, because we've mentioned a few things, and we will get to Santa Maria in Trastevere in a minute, but I do want to talk, because you do love Cavallini, and very much, and like, just to let you know, because I was working with Dylan today, we're refilming many of the shots that we did over the summer, just because we have a better quality camera. And I said, okay, we're going to do this. Because the church itself has, on either side, you go through a courtyard to get to the church. On either side, there are two convents. On the left is the Benedictine monastery. And so you ring a bell. The whole procedure I love. You ring a bell and you ask the nuns, can I go visit the Cavallini frescoes? Now, these frescoes are the counter facades, so they're right behind the facade, so that people understand. And that, I think, inconceivable for guides, or inconceivable for people today, how this happened. But at some point through the centuries of a building that's over 1,000 years old, they did a kind of restoration. They changed things, and they covered up and forgot about these frescoes from the late 1200s, early 1300s. And then later on, in another work done, they rediscovered them. And that these frescoes by Cavallini, if you guys ever have the opportunity, right, you can go up, you take this modern elevator up into this room, and you can walk and be 6 inches away by looking at these amazing frescoes, where an artist is bringing in, you know, uh, as you were saying, even with those mosaics that were from the 9th century, they're starting to get emotion. They're starting to be realistic. And he's even brought it up to a different level. But you can just be right there and looking at their faces, or looking at those beautiful multicolored wings of the angels. I believe the scene that's being depicted is the Last Judgment, or the Giudizio Universale. I mean, and it's not complete, but or even the Last Supper. I can't remember, but it's just so exceptional that, you know, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it
The
anywhere.
colors.
Yeah.
Let's say that, first of all, let me add that the Last Judgment by Cavallini was covered in the 18th century. The 18th century is a period of history in which they don't really care much about the Middle Ages.
Mm-hmm.
There is a completely different approach to art, and probably, I mean, the fresco Cavallini weren't that important back then, also because Cavallini has been only recently studied, really, and we recognize now his value and his importance in history of art, something that back in the 18th century they couldn't possibly have a clue on this. And why? Because Cavallini is, like Giotto, one of the artists that started the revolution in the history of art. So they little by little brought us to the Renaissance. But because of Vasari, Vasari is his writer. I mean, he lived at the time of Michelangelo Buonarroti. He wrote a book on the lives of the artists, etc. Vasari talks about Giotto like the man that in the 14th century started this revolution. But Giotto is from Florence. Vasari is from Florence. I mean, of course, he's a supporter of the Florentine school.
Sure.
Cavallini is from Rome, actually, so he started the Scuola Romana, the Roman school of frescoes. But Cavallini is also much older than Giotto, so it's unlikely that Giotto influenced Cavallini. So Cavallini, it seems, you know, the story was that he died when he was 100 years old or something. At least the son of Cavallini used to say so. But he was an incredibly old man, and we have a few things by Cavallini here in Rome, one of which is the Last Judgment. Now, recently, with our recent studies, we now can appreciate how important Cavallini is for this process of passage from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance. But back in those days, it's not Giotto, goodbye. I mean, we know that Giotto, Cavallini, Arnolfo di Cambio, Cimabue, they were all artists that met at some point in Assisi. So probably there was this contamination, different influences. But also I believe that Cavallini from Rome had a, you know, when you have in your DNA something like the volumes of the bodies. I mean, this is why Cavallini is so special. And if you look at the Last Judgment, but any other of his work, rather than having just statical figures with no depth, no expressions. In Cavallini, each of the angels of the Last Judgment has a different face. They're individuals. The colors that he used, they're used also to create this effect of depth. The bodies are very natural. They have a volume, they have masses, they sort of exist in a big-dimensional way, but they exist. And also there is this fake perspective that is not right, it's not correct. We're not in the Renaissance as yet when the perspective, the technique of drawing a proper perspective was studied. But still, he tries, like Giotto, they try. So Cavallini is an incredibly important artist in history of art. He's from Rome. Many of his paintings got lost because they were destroyed, and who knows? When we find something by Cavallini, for us is a real treasure.
Sure.
Now, I don't want to start this fight. It's better Cavallini than Giotto. I guess that this is not the point.
No.
But, let's say that probably Cavallini had a deep impact also in the Florentine school.
Sure.
So he's definitely one of the major artists of the Middle Ages.
Wow, that was beautifully clarified for me, and I'm sure for everyone else who's listening. Thank you. That was lovely. I think it is exceptional. I think if people really do love art and have this kind of idea and this struggle that it must have been for this. I never realized that he was Roman, but I always knew he was important. And to go there, I mean, and to let people know that no one goes to see this. You know, people don't know a lot about it. Some guides who just really want to show something to people that is exceptionally special, and if they're there at the right time. But if people, I think, if they are very much interested in this influential artist or any other artist to see this, it is absolutely spectacular and worthwhile to go and see, and no one goes. So I highly recommend it. Now, let us jump over to for me, one of the most beautiful churches in Italy. I think that Santa Maria in Trastevere is also exceptional from every level. So I know we don't see, this is the thing, is we're scratching the surface about this stuff. So tell us a few things that you think are valid points to talk about. We don't have to cover the entire church for people, but let's just say, like, hey, a couple of nooks and crannies, something special about Santa Maria in Trastevere that you like.
So, believe it or not, Cavallini is in Santa Maria in Trastevere as well, but in the mosaics. And in the mosaics, it's rather difficult to really obtain the same effect that Cavallini was able to obtain in painting. So there's still, sort of Byzantine style, but you can see there are some novelties in what he does in these, in the stories of the life of Mother Mary. First of all, they're really stories, in mosaics. I mean, he's telling us, there are actions involved in each part of the story of Mother Mary, of the life of Mother Mary. So even there is movement inside. Is incredible because it's something we have never seen before in a mosaic.
No.
And Cavallini is there on the triumphal arch, basically. The apse is also very interesting, but it's not by Cavallini. But if you look at the apse of Santa Maria in Trastevere and the apse of Santa Cecilia, you then can understand the difference between Pascal I, that is all of a sudden wants naturalism and sort of something more realistic, rather than the standard Byzantine beautiful mosaics like the ones that we have in the apse of Santa Maria in Trastevere. But they're completely different styles. I think what is interesting about the Church of Santa Maria in Trastevere is also the story, which is connected to this Callisto we mentioned before, Pope Callisto. And Callisto basically was killed nearby in his house. It was during the persecutions, of course. He was basically left dying in the well of the house. He was Pope at some point, and he wanted to build this church dedicated to Mother Mary. So he's the man who actually commissioned the church, and he commissioned the church in a very interesting place, because there is a road in Trastevere. Even the toponomastic is very interesting in Trastevere. There is a road nearby. It's called the Vicolo dell'Olio. Because the Legion wants that in different numbers, different dates, it doesn't matter too much. But let's say 38 before Christ, there was there a place where the Roman soldiers retired. So the war used to go and spend sometimes, the so-called taberna meritoria. There were soldiers drinking. You have to imagine, these Roman soldiers having fun, and all of a sudden the floor exploded, and this oily substance, watery substance, but it was also, it looked like oil, black, came up from the floor. This was considered a sign that something special had to happen. So, of course, centuries later, the Christians took this to show how there was already sort of a feeling that something special had to happen, within a few years. In actual fact, if you go by the altar of Santa Maria in Trastevere, you see the Fons Oli written in Latin, where this is where this oil came from. But There is no oil underneath the church. It's no petrol. It's no gasoline. It's nothing like that. They've done some excavation. It's not real.
Mm.
Probably what happened is that right there, right underneath the church, at the time of the Romans, there was um, an underground aqueduct
Mm.
that it was taking the water from the nearby Naumachia
Mm.
back to the river Tiber. L'acqua Alsietina,
Ecco.
in Augustus, two before Christ, built this gigantic swimming pool
Water sports arena.
for naval battles, basically.
Mhm.
And in order to do that, he also built an aqueduct, the
Sure.
Acqua Alsietina, that comes from Bracciano area,
Yeah,
Martignano, down north on the mountains.
but it
It's
wasn't
not
good.
good water to drink. No, absolutely. It was used just for the games. But of course, once the water enters this huge pool, then it has to also exit. Probably there was this one of the conduits that would take the water outside, uh,
Mm.
down, back to the river.
Mm.
And this water probably wasn't good. So it was smelly. It was,
Oily, gross, yucky.
yeah, exactly. So
It already wasn't clean, and so then it was like God knows what was going on in those naval battles, or what they were doing.
pieces of meat and blood everywhere. Who knows? But probably if something really happened, if it's not just the legion, it's most possibly due to this. In fact, in the writings that talk about these legions, you have to imagine that fons ollens in Latin means the source, the spring of oil. But Ollens may have been translated wrongly, written, transcripted wrongly, sorry, from Latin, which probably it was olida, which means smelly.
Oh my God. So you're talking about smelly water came up as a sign of the Messiah, first for the Jews and then later on for the Christians. This is amazing. Okay.
But
You
of
know,
course, we have to make things a bit nicer, so we.
oh my God, thank you so much, Enrica. I mean, this is why I love having these conversations. People, this is not work for me. This is because I've just learned a great clarification. I've always known it as the fount of oil. I was like, I have no idea what this oil is. Even Cavallini, when he depicts it in his mosaics, you see Mary giving birth and then this little pink church in the background, and it has this black, like tar oil substance coming from the door. But to say that it could be from smelly, putrid Alsietina used Naumachian water makes a lot of sense, and that they didn't put two and two together, and that there was like flooding going up from it if it was going out. I mean, wow, this is just amazing. Well, this is what makes Rome amazing.
Oh yeah, and all this connection between artists that work in different places and then they meet again and they work together and then it's just great.
Yeah, yep. And again, with this church, like I said, we have just barely talked about the surface of this church. The mosaics are outstanding. The covered ceiling is very, very beautiful. I was told, because my friend Frances, who passed away, I became very passionate about tour guiding through her. She called herself the tour goddess. She was never an official guide, but she was the tour goddess. And she specifically, she said, I want to have my funeral in Santa Maria in Trastevere.
Another thing that I like about that church,
Mm.
Somehow it's made up of all different styles, because we have very ancient stuff. Like you enter, before even entering the church, in the porticos outside, there are all these stones in the walls. There are basically the epigraphies that were on the tombs of people that were buried nearby. There was one of a liberto, an ex-slave that received his freedom at some point. That is so funny, because you write, my name is, and me and my wife lived together for 30 years and never a fight.
Oh yeah, that's how I remember about that. Yeah, it's amazing because, of course, they took a lot of the panels from the catacombs for the graves and the loculi.
So there is that one, but then you enter and there is this there are the columns of the church that are incredible, because in order to build that church, Innocenzo II took columns from the Bath of Caracalla.
That's right.
It had to be special, was very important. They couldn't use different columns, different sizes of columns. Like very often you go to a Roman, an ancient Roman church, like for example, San Clemente, and you see in the old church all the columns are different. No, Santa Maria in Trastevere is incredible. All the columns are huge, perfectly done, and they all come from the same place. The capitals also are interesting because they have this sort of face that represents a symbol of Isis, a pagan goddess, because of course, they were taken from places that had nothing to do with Christianity. Some of the faces of the capitals have been scratched, and then you see this ceiling that is, baroque.
Yep.
And all the styles live together in perfect combination. And unlike other places in Rome, when you enter and you say, "Oh, this doesn't look right," in Trastevere, everything is in harmony.
Yeah, that's
Even
right.
the floor imitate a cosmatesque floor. The Cosmati family were a family of this like floor making people, and you see similar floors, for example, if you go to the Sistine Chapel, but in many churches there are these floors made in the Middle Ages, using little pieces of marbles and stones, creating geometrical designs. They're really beautiful. But the floor in Santa Maria in Trastevere is modern. It was made by Pio IX, so you can you recognize that it's not ancient because it's so well done.
It is. It's beautifully well done.
But still, they try to put together all. It wasn't done on purpose, probably, but the result is just an incredibly beautiful church that you must see. The feeling is beautiful.
Yeah. And even the facade is beautiful. It has some faded frescoes. And did you ever notice that up at the top on the facade, Mary is bare chested? She is breastfeeding Jesus.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Which is amazing.
There are some mosaics on the facade. Now, the facade has changed a lot again during the restoration of the church, but something still remains of, when the church was the church you see today, the shape you see today, the time of Innocenzo II, the 12th century was built. And so some part of the mosaic of the facade remains. So Mother Mary, that breastfeeding the Jesus, and next to her there are these ladies holding lamps, 5 ladies on the right, 5 on the left. And it's funny because all these lamps burning oil, possibly. Most of them are lit up. 2 of them aren't. 2 of these ladies don't have fire in their lamps. So all kind of discussions around why is that. Maybe because they were widowed. Who knows? But it's just possible that during the different times, different period of history, during the restorations, some of the artists forgot to add a thing or another. So who knows? But they're really nice. And yes, on the very top, there are some frescoes that are fading, but they're frescoes of the 18th century anyway. I wouldn't say they're not beautiful, but they're not well preserved. It is difficult to really see them in their beauty.
But I do love the mosaics. Another thing, just to kind of put a cap on it with this church, which is lovely, and it kind of encapsulates Trastevere. It is always a church that is very, very active. There's always a mass going on. It is very much, as you said, it's cohesive, but it's a very vibrant, alive church. All the candles are lit, obviously, to make prayers. There's a lovely statue of Saint Anthony made of wood, a simple statue, but he is the patron saint of lost objects, and people write little letters. You just very much see the faith for those people who are Catholic. It is alive. And also on Christmas Day, they open up the church, and they have, for the many poor and homeless that live in Trastevere, they have their Christmas meal inside the church. They remove all the chairs and they have tables set up for people, which I don't think any other church in Rome does that.
I didn't mention this, but when I was a teenager, I used to participate to some of the activities of the Sant'Egidio community, which in certain days would gather inside the Church of Santa Maria in Trastevere. And then we would do some work for, let's say, the kids of the poor families. So we were all sent to do schooling to them after in the afternoon to support them with their homework, etc. So it was a great community as far as I remember. There was a lot of love and a lot of really religious feeling in what they were doing, really an honest faith. But it wasn't a community just made up of people or Christians. It was a community that was just there to help the poor. And now I just remember this talking with you. That was part of them at some point that I really participated in the activities, and we used to gather in Santa Maria in Trastevere.
This is lovely. This is lovely. I mean, this is what I love about this, but because, and I'm so glad that we're able to do this and that people have the opportunity to listen into our discussions, because it's not like when we are talking about this to people who don't know a lot about it, that is our job as we tell these stories to people, but we're sharing this with each other. So it's like you're telling me wonderful stories that I have a certain foundation that I know, but I don't know nearly as detailed as what you've been telling me today. And it's a great learning experience. That's why we always, as guides, love to share things with each other, I think. Yes.
I want to add one thing, because we decided at the very beginning, okay, choose two churches, and we decided Santa Cecilia and Santa Maria are the ones you have to see. But there is one church in particular that I find important in this moment of history.
Okay.
Which is Santa Maria della Scala. Santa Maria della Scala is closed most of the time, but it's important for two things. The one that is not related to recent time is the fact that the Morte della Vergine, the Death of Virgin Mary by Caravaggio, was made for a chapel that was there. And I don't know whether you heard the story. Probably you know the story was made for commissioned by Laercio Cherubini, which wanted a painting by Caravaggio, but the painting, the result was upsetted basically the Carmelitans that owned the church of Santa Maria della Scala, because it was considered an horrible painting. Mother Mary was depicted showing the feet. She was turning green. The body was swollen, and she looked like any other prostitute in the city of Rome, and probably was one of the prostitutes that Caravaggio had the chance to see that had drawn in the River Tiber.
Yeah.
So took that as a model. Of course, the Carmelitan refused to have that painting, but it's a beautiful painting. Now it's at the Louvre. It was made for that church.
Yeah, Caravaggio
is incredibly important because there are the bones of a man, which is a black man. It's called Il Moro di Garibaldi. Not many people know Garibaldi. Garibaldi is considered an hero in Italy because he's the man to which we have to say thanks for fighting for the unification of Italy. So between 1860 and 1861, 1870, when Rome became eventually the capital. But Garibaldi is important also because in the previous years, so we're talking about 1848, 1849, he was already fighting, trying to kick out the Pope out of the city of Rome and transforming the monarchy of the Pope, because the popes were kings, into a republic. Now, many battles happened. One in particular on the Janiculum Hill, right above Trastevere. In that battles, his best man died. His name is Andreas Aguirre. He was from Uruguay, and Garibaldi met this guy when he was fighting for the freedom in South America. Because Garibaldi is called the hero of the two worlds. There is a statue of Garibaldi in the Washington Park in New York, by the way.
Square Park, yeah.
And of course, it was made, paid by the Italians, not by the Americans. Probably wouldn't know much about him, but he's a man that he tried really to support. In South America, the fightings that they were doing, also to abolish slavery. So imagine that this guy, Andreas Aguirre, is the son of slaves. He's fighting with Garibaldi. First he's lieutenant, but then he's so good, he becomes tenant, and then he becomes the man who protects Garibaldi himself. He's the man that is always next to him. And he's black. He's dark skin. He's from Uruguay, but originally the families come from Africa. So he dies, unfortunately. He was very, very good fighter, but he dies because he couldn't survive to a French grenade. So he dies and the bones are there. The sad thing is that while on the Janiculum Hill, we have busts and faces of many of the patriots that fought for the unification of Italy. For the Roman Republic, as Garibaldi wanted. His face is not there. So there is a movement, the Black Lives Matter movement Rome, that is now pushing our local politicians, Virginia Raggi, in the community, because they want a bust of this man on the journey. Absolutely. It's for me, it's something important also because we want to be part of this inclusion and diversity, especially in Trastevere. So it's funny that this guy is buried in a place that has a vocation of diversity and inclusion.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'm sure that it will eventually happen, and that there are these other figures in the history. And thank you for bringing up that the Black Lives Movement, of course. And if people want to go to visit this tomb and see about this, that is something that is going on today in Santa Maria della Scala, which is one of the other churches. There are many churches in Trastevere, but that is a significant one also because of the painting, and that Caravaggio did always get in trouble, that's what I was trying to mention, for painting things that were too realistic or using prostitutes or using people with really dirty feet and stuff, and he had to do them over again, or sometimes they were not accepted. But beautiful points to add up. There are many more discussions and many more points to talk about in the future, Enrica. I wanted to thank you so much because this was lovely. Like I said, Trastevere is one of the most fascinating neighborhoods. It's one of the most popular places to live, one of the most expensive places to live, but definitely a place that is of value to visit. I think also, as you said, people have to see what they have to see. We have a tour called the Day in Rome tour, right? Which is like what you need to see. And then we had a lovely immersion tour, which would include Trastevere, which would say what you should see. And it does have many, many things of great value, which we kind of touched upon today. So thank you so much, Enrica. I really appreciate the time because I know you're working a full-time job, and then we're doing this and it's about 10:45 tonight. So people can know that we're finishing up because it is really a pleasure. Thank you for listening to our TE Talks with Guides. We have a new episode every Wednesday. Please subscribe to get an alert when each podcast comes out. Rate us and tell people how you enjoyed it and share it on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Most importantly, if you enjoyed it, send us a feedback about the show. Also, if you are curious about what some of these people and places we talked about look like, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch the video on this podcast where we have inserted special images for you to further enjoy the story.